Hi, I'm Brett, and welcome to the latest edition of Random Book Talk. Following a very successful career in advertising, Boyd Anderson is fast becoming one of Australia's best-selling novelists. Amberroad is his fourth historical fiction, set against the backdrop of Singapore in World War II and the collapse of the British Empire. Welcome, Boyd.
Thanks, Brett. It's good to be here.
You make no allusions about the parallels between Amberroad and Gone with the Wind. In fact, it kind of percolates right through the book. Interestingly, Gone with the Wind was brought to the screen in 1939, just as the Second World War was starting. How did that classic inspire you and the characters in Amberroad?
Well, that's actually where the whole thing started. I was riding my bike one day. I had just seen the Gone with the Wind, the film, which I've got to say I think is better than the book. However, I'd just seen the film probably for the 20th, 30th time.
Yep.
And it was just, as you say, percolating around in my brain that that story about the end of the civilization of the South because of the Civil War is really not a big story when you think about what happened as a result of the Second World War. That was the end of the British Empire.
Yeah.
An entire empire finished. But not only did that empire finish over those 5 or 6 years, it finished on one day. The fall of Singapore was the end of the British Empire. You can date it to that one day. And that's when I started to think, that's the story I wanted to write. Then I, as you say, percolated around for a bit. And I've also found that I like the characters of Gone with the Wind. That strangely strong woman and the resourceful, heroic man, and how their relationship brings out what it does in the two of those people against the backdrop of a completely changing world is what excited me. So yeah. I sat down and started writing it, and I just couldn't stop writing it.
Well, you've written a cracker of a book. You know, I literally couldn't stop turning the pages. And the thing that brought it to life for me was the incredible detail in the history. And you're right, the British Empire was disintegrating. A way of life as well. Victoria's and Sebastian's way of life is being swept aside. I can't imagine how much effort goes into researching a book like Amberroad. Where do you begin?
Well, you begin by loving research. If you don't like research, if you don't like delving into why things happen, you can't do it. Fortunately, I love doing that, and so it's not a task. It's a pleasurable pastime. The sources I had were impeccable because apart from all the sources that are available in Google, the libraries and archives and so on, the sources I had sources in my own family. My wife is from that part of the world, and she has relatives who lived through the time. Right. And I was able to interview them and get specific information, and was directed into specific sources which were rather exclusive, and certainly sources that I hadn't seen delved into in fiction before.
Because the detail of the history is remarkable, and it feels at times quite personal. I believe, is it Angsana Lodge, which is the Sebastian Boosted, one of the main characters' family home. There's a link with your own family? Or was it inspired by a home in your own family?
Amberroad, part of my wife's family actually lived in Amberroad during, right up until the 60s. Not in that particular, not in a house like that. A house like that comes from another branch of the family, but not in Singapore, in Malaysia. They had houses of that type in other parts of the Malay Peninsula.
Right.
So essentially, putting all those things together, there were houses like that in Amberroad. Amberroad is a real street, by the way.
Wow.
And there were houses like that in those days. I mean, they still exist. It's a quite different road now. It used to be right on the waterfront.
Right.
Now it's about a mile from the waterfront.
Wow.
There's so much landfill in Singapore, so it's got a completely different feel about it.
I don't want to give away the ending, but the Angsana Lodge and Amber Road, they're very important in the story. And it's a nice little segue to the main character of the book, Victoria Koo, who is in some ways the Scarlett O'Hara of this story. And like Scarlett, she's someone you both admire at times and want to admonish. In fact, she can be infuriating at times. I suppose I'm interested in why you set the novel around Victoria and the inspiration, I suppose, for doing that.
Well, look, it's not in some ways. That's where I started. Scarlett and Rhett were where I started.
Right.
Because they are such wonderful characters. Obviously, Victoria is not Scarlett. That's a starting point for her. Yeah. And Joe Spencer is not Rhett. He is a starting point for Rhett. And they are, because they come from different parts of the world in a completely different time in history, so they're different. But yes, look, Victoria, essentially what I find is that I really like writing women characters. Women characters who let's face it, women start from a disadvantageous position in life, generally, and certainly in that part of the world and in that time, very disadvantageous. But a woman who can, through her own resourcefulness, through her relationships, through the family, and through the events that she finds herself in, manages to find within herself the power to change her life completely. I find very inspiring, and so it's not difficult to write about. It's inspiring to write about it.
She's an inspiring character, and she goes through a lot in this book, but she's right there at the end. And I mean, I guess she and Joe are the two main characters. I love Joe Spencer, by the way. He's a fantastic character. And at the end of the book, it's a big book at over 600 pages. I had that feeling I always have when I finished a book that I love, which is I kind of feel a little bereft, actually, that it's over and I have to say goodbye to them. And I got to thinking, well, I wonder what it's like for the author, the writer. So what is it like when you've literally written that last sentence? And I imagine you've been working on a book for months, years.
Yes, well, an author obviously has an advantage over a reader in that the characters never stop. The characters never die. They're always there in your head. So there's always the opportunity, for instance, to write about them again. So they're not over.
So there could be an Amber Road, the sequel.
Well, theoretically there could be, yes. Many people have tried to write Gone with the Wind, the sequel, and failed. So you've got to be very careful. However, I'm sure in Margaret Mitchell's head, Scarlett and Rhett never died. Whether they got back together again, who knows? Whether, well, I'm not going to give it away, but
no, don't give it away.
Victoria and Joe live on, as far as I'm concerned. So I don't feel bereft at the end of the book, because that's that part of the story. It's almost like that's a chapter which I've finished. And if I want to, I can go back to it. Whether anyone's interested in reading that, that's another thing. But so I guess bereavement is not part of the process.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's a good answer. I guess I'm always interested in what writers are reading. So I imagine through the process of writing Amber Road, you've read a few books as well. Do you have a favourite of the last 12 months?
Of the last 12 months? Well, look, yes, writers, you have to read. I'm reading all the time. I'm reading constantly. And I guess it comes down to two types of books that I'm reading, two types of things that I'm reading. One is I'm reading for research, usually for the next book I'm writing. Certainly talking about the last 12 months. Or I'm reading for enjoyment, far less for enjoyment than a regular reader, because mostly I have to read for either research or for inspiration.
Sure. So is there a standout?
Well, can I divide it into those two things?
Sure.
Because certainly for research, two books which have really stood out for me, because one book is Manhattan 45 by Jan Morris, it captures Manhattan or America at the height of its power, and I find it fascinating to read. That was research. And another one for research is one called China Lessons by John Pomfret, which is also a few years old, but it was about, John Pomfret was the first American university student to go to China to enroll in a Chinese university in the 80s after China opened up. And it's his story about half a dozen of his classmates. And if you want to know about China now, if you read that book, you'll find out why China is like it is now.
Wow,
it's a fascinating book, Chinese Lessons, John Pomfret.
And for fun?
And for fun, I read Tim Winton's The Riders, which, look, that was the best book I read this year, The Riders. I hadn't read it before. I'm a late arrival at Tim Winton, which is a sad thing to say, but there you go. And I just loved it.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Boyd. If you'd like to read a sample chapter of Amberroad, head to the website now. You'll also have the opportunity to sign up to our e-newsletter to learn about more great books and events. And stay tuned for the next edition of Random Book Talk. Until then.